Hello, everyone. First and foremost, I want to say thank you so much for subscribing to the Patreon. If you're listening to this, there's a good chance you gave me some money, so I really appreciate it. And we're going to be doing another one of my article readings that I do, where I go on my website, use a random number generator to pull an article that I've written in the past, and then basically do a read through it while providing some commentary. Kind of a weird coincidence this week is I got Xenosaga episode 3, which I actually just like 2 or 3 days ago endorsed Kamimimi's article that talks a little bit about Xenosaga episode 3 and why she's actually not a huge fan of it. And I'm not a huge fan of Xenosaga episode 3 either myself. However, it is probably the most, I'd say it's a game that is generally considered to be good by the people who played it. Now, admittedly, if you're playing Xenosaga episode 3, then chances are you're already invested in Xenosaga, right? But I feel like generally the feeling about that game is a positive feeling online. So to see Kamimimi kind of fit in my general negativity about the game, that was nice. And also, this article that I wrote is incredibly old and is not well written and probably does not do a good job communicating what my actual problems with Xenosaga were. But that's what we're doing today. We're reading through it. This is a post that I did in April of 2009. I think this is less than a year after I started writing, and this is going to be really apparent. You know, sometimes it's really hard for me to read out loud just because I'm not great at reading text out loud at times, or at least, you know, text I haven't just actively written. This is probably going to be troublesome because it's probably going to be pretty poorly written. But like I said, I do not like Xenosaga 3 episode much, so we're probably going to be, pretty negative throughout this. I'll be curious to see if I can glean any insight from, like, you know, what my feelings were back then out of this article. I feel like I've read it somewhat recently in the past to kind of recapture what feelings I had about my negativity around the game. And I didn't get a lot out of it. So anyways, again, this is from April 14th, 2009, and it is a review of Xenosaga episode 3. And we get started here. The original Xenosaga raised the bar for RPGs in terms of graphics and gameplay. While episode 1 was fairly successful, no comma here, episode 2 didn't live up to the expectations to a large majority of consumers. In a series like Xenosaga, where every game directly relates to one another, a single title can break the entire series. Once episode 2 did poorly, the opportunity for success on episode 3 was greatly lowered. In order to break the series back into the mainstream, episode 3 would need to be extremely successful, giving people a reason to play through the last 2 episodes. Does this series deserve an episode 4, or was its early deaths? What I'm trying to say here in the text is, was its early death justified? But I wrote it weird in a way that doesn't read well at all. I'm kind of, just a note before I get too far into this, I'm kind of curious about my comment here about Xenosaga episode 1 raising the bar in terms of graphics and gameplay for RPGs. I don't really know if that's the case, like, thinking back on it. Like, I feel like I can't remember where this game came out in the context of, like, or the first episode came out in the context of, like, Final Fantasy X. I think there are things about the game visually that definitely were very striking at the time, and I loved the gameplay, so maybe for me, it raised that bar, but I don't know. In the way I'm talking about it, I think it sounds more like I'm saying for the industry as a whole, not just me, so I'm kind of curious, like, how valid that comment is right there, or if I'm just, you know, I don't know. This was over 10 years ago. Not sure where my mind space was. Anyways, back to the article. Xenosaga 1 and 2 fans should know the basics of the story. The universe is under attack by the Gnosis, which are alien-like creatures. Shion, Cosmos, and their large group of friends, that's a weird way to put it, a large group of friends go off to save the universe from this destruction. While many would argue Xenosaga is much more than that, episode 3 doesn't offer much beyond that. Character stories that would usually be fleshed out come to an abrupt end, quickly being ended within a few scenes. This is probably due to the fact that they had to cut the series 2 games short and end everything in episode 3. Instead, episode 3 focuses on telling the story of Shion and Cosmos. While this is fine considering it is the main story, it's not nearly as interesting as as many of the stories in episode 1 and 2 of Xenosaga relating to other characters. Many times it felt way too generic. Shion as a main character crumbles with constant whining that can really get on your nerves. Episode 3's story isn't entirely bad though, with twists and turns littered throughout to spice up the story a bit and keeps you guessing till the end. Unfortunately, that end, in quotes, has a massive hole in the plot. It seems like they were trying to leave space for an episode 4 if the game was successful, but instead instead of giving you closure along with opening opportunity for the future, it makes sense the series feels incomplete. That sentence is weird. A common complaint in episode 2 was the steep learning curve of the battle system. Episode 3 does its best to lessen the learning curve, but possibly too much so. Episode 3 almost completely removes any traces from the past episode's battle systems. Other than spell names and its items names, the only things that remain intact is the boost meter. The only other thing that remains intact is the boost meter. Apologies, that's my own reading there, that messed up, which has also undergone some major changes. What we get is a typical turn-based RPG with attacks, techniques, ether, magic, and special attacks. The boost meter, which used to be essential for combat in episode 1 and 2, has become an afterthought. Timing boost rarely feels like it has much impact outside of emergency healing or doing a little extra damage. Instead, the boost meter also fuels your special gauge, which are powerful single target area of effect moves. While some strategy is used in using these moves, it has little to no depth other than choosing what attack is most effective against what enemy. Sorry, I gotta scroll down here. A break meter was added to add some depth, but it amounts to little more than maxing out your opponent's endurance and using the most powerful attack. On the flip side, your team also have break meter, so enemies can cause major damage on you, but aside from boss battles, this is rarely an issue. Overall, episode 3 plays out like any other RPG, killing any identity that the series had with its combat system, aside from the mech portion of the title, which amounts to just an altered version of the normal combat, with more limited options. This is kind of interesting. This is me talking now. So one thing that I had emphasized in both Kamimi's post and Electric Barrier talked to me a little bit about this in the Discord. They actually really highlighted the mech combat as like a very impressive and good part of this game, despite the main combat being kind of boring. So it's interesting to me that my comment here says that the combat is the same but with even less options. So I'm kind of curious how, like, if I just didn't know what I was doing, or if I do have the actual different opinion than them. Kind of the problem with a lot of this article in general so far is I don't really explain a lot. I just say this is a problem and then move on, which I think is not a great way to communicate. But, this is like less than a year after I started writing, right? So, like, freaking I'm still figuring stuff out at this point. Anyways. Okay. The combat is just oversimplified and needs some sort of depth. Although the combat keeps a similar pace to episode 2. I'm adding some words in here to help make these sentences read a little better, which improved on the sluggish combat from episode 1. On the bright side, episode 2's skill system was removed and replaced, getting rid of a lot of the downtime that was in episode 2, sitting in menus and selecting skills. This time, there's only a single pool of points for skills and spells, making it much more manageable. Again, this is me just talking now. I'm kind of curious, like I don't remember that very well. A lot of problems with like Bot and Kaitos is a lot of time where you're spending time in the menus just kind of organizing stuff. I'm guessing episode 2 had a lot of the same problems. I think they're kind of the same era of Monolith Soft there. I think another problem is that episode 2 is a very short game, which is like 20 hours long. But it's interesting to read some of these things because I don't remember them super well. So I don't remember if I played this in 2009 or if I was just randomly reviewing it because I felt that was a good time. I might check Amazon. I might have actually ordered it through my Amazon account. I might be able to go back and see if I ordered it on Amazon in this time frame. Back to the article. By 2006, the PlayStation 2 was starting to show its age, and new consoles were making their way into the market. Episode 3 pulls off a surprising amount for a 6-year-old system at the time. Character models look great, and environments are detailed. Special attacks look great and feel strong. At times, the camera will zoom out to show whole environments, which some look really impressive. There are some larger blurry textures, but considering the platform, it's acceptable. There is some frequent slowdown during the more detailed cutscenes and rarely any slowdown during gameplay. The art direction is vastly superior than episode 1 and 2, although due to the constant change in art directions, some characters still retain a look from the previous titles, making them stand out and look awkward. It would have been nice to see more enemy types. Most enemies you encounter you saw in previous episodes. Some even look ripped directly from the last entry. During combat, there's a great use of camera angles to give a more cinematic feel, especially during the mech portions of the title. That's something that Electric Barrier and Community highlighted. So there's that bit there. Oh, that's the end of a sentence. During the mech portion of the title. During exploration, the camera can be a little troublesome, making it difficult to see what's ahead when you start moving toward the screen. Do I want to say anything about that before I move on? I don't think so, other than I think I stand by the fact that Xenosaga Episode 3 is a very solid game visually in a lot of ways still. Obviously it's a PS2 game, but it looks really good overall. I do seem to recall, I think it was like Alan or whatever his name is, the kind of main, I don't know if you call him love interest per se, he's kind of off and on a love interest. I remember him looking very sickly by the time he got to episode 3, and I don't think that was like he is sickly kind of thing. I think it was just how they textured him kind of got worse and worse as time went on, because they went for a more realistic look than the earlier games, the first game. Unfortunately, back to the article, while the game looks great, the presentation at times can be messy, okay? Unlike previous episodes, most of the cutscenes take place using simple animations. This is really disappointing due to the level of detail episode 1 and 2 had in their cutscenes. This wouldn't be too bad if they decided to swap between detailed and simple cutscenes one after the other. Wait, let me read that. This wouldn't be too bad if they did not, so this wouldn't have been a problem, I think is what I'm trying to say. This wouldn't have been a problem if they decided to I think what I'm trying to say is that they're swapping between detailed and simple cutscenes, like back and forth, like ones with like fancy animations versus one where they're just like sitting there talking with text boxes. And so it makes it jarring, I think is what I'm trying to say there. How I worded it's like a double negative, right? So I don't know how to fix that without actually typing stuff in, and we're not doing that. This makes it annoying because, and then I explain it here. This makes it annoying because during the middle of a cutscene, all of a sudden there's a black screen for loading, then the next screen shows off something they couldn't have done using the basic palette of animations, at which point the cutscene lasts for a very short time and returns back to the simple cutscenes. This really breaks up the experience, making awkward transitions where there shouldn't be any. Sometimes the basic animations won't match the scene exactly, making for some strange moments. That is something that I think Baten Kaitos had a very similar presentation in a lot of ways, and it was just basically text boxes with stock animations. And Xenosaga was just probably way over budget, and way too much money was pumped into its presentation. And I think the fact that Xenosaga Episode 2 is so short probably is a part of that. They had a lot less money, but they wanted to keep the production value the same, but they ended up with a much shorter game because of that. So, anyways, the entire Xenosaga series has been censored. The entire Xenosaga series has seen censored content in North America, in the North American release, and Episode 3 is no different. The main difference is that in Episode 1 and 2, it was covered up well. No one would guess that the games were censored. In Episode 3, the censoring is incredibly obvious. All the blood was removed for the title, which makes for some weird and sometimes laughable moments, such as a girl's mother dying and the girl is just trying to put the blood back into her mom, but since the blood is censored, it looks like she's trying to put air back into her mom. Another example is someone screams at the sight of a person being stabbed in their bed, and because all the blood was censored, it just looks like she's screaming over someone sleeping in their bed. It's really strange and is quite disappointing considering how well Episode 1 and 2 were censored. I'm actually kind of surprised. So I think at this time, knowing me as a person, I probably would be more upset at the fact that it was censored in the first place. I'd be like, no, don't freaking censor your video game, make it however it's going to be. And so to some degree I still feel that way at the time or now, but like at some point I'm just like, if the ESRB will let you rate it whatever, let them rate it whatever. I don't remember if Xenosaga episode 3 got away from a mature rating or not. That's probably the reason why I want to get in the T rating, or at least try to. But I'm kind of surprised that I like took it from the approach of, well, considering 1 and 2 like were also censored, they were censored in a way that it was not obvious, and so it doesn't bother me, which is something that I kind of still stand by today with like localization work. If a localization doesn't feel wrong when you're like playing it in English, it doesn't bother me that much. Sure, it's like annoying when you go and look and you can see the things that were changed. You're like, oh, this part of the story was changed because of stuff going on, right? But like at the end of the day, in terms of like how it affects a game, I almost would like not mark a game down for being censored if they censor it well enough that you can't even notice and that it's not even a part of the problem, right? So I'm kind of surprised I took that approach there, but you know, very mature of 19-year-old me, I feel like. The soundtrack in this game is really well done, with some really epic themes and music that really fits the scenario. Although the dramatic, slow, sad music during at least one boss fight is getting overplayed in Japanese RPGs. Okay. While there are a few off-sounding voices, most of the voice acting range from decent to great. You never feel like you wish you could turn the voices off. Sound effects sound great though, although the footsteps may be a little too loud, as clacking of your character's shoes on the ground tends to stand out a little too much. Oddly enough, the same loud clacking sound is used when your character is barefooted as well. That line always makes me laugh, just like the fact that I spent like a solid, it's one sentence, but it's like a solid like 2 to 3 sentences worth of run-on sentence that I dedicate to foot clacking. Xenosaga episode 3's music is very good though. Although this is very much how I would write about music at the time, it's still very hard for me to write about music in games. I'm terrible at it. And I think these days I just kind of ignore music in reviews rather than even trying, because then this kind of stuff comes out where I'm like, yeah, you know, it's good. Maybe a Tokadol is the more most recent game that I actually even tried to address it with, honestly. So Episode 3 will take you around 30 to 35 hours to complete, a bit longer if you decide to put some time into leveling up. Segment addresses make a return, which have collectible items inside of them and data files containing additional information on characters and events also available to get. I don't know if segment addresses is something in the game, or if that's, I don't know. I don't know if that's a typo or if that is something in the game itself. Probably should have explained that. There's also a lemming style puzzle game available from time to time that really tests your wits and reflexes and is very entertaining and challenging. After you beat the title, you gain the ability to rewatch all the cutscenes as a bonus. Characters can be in their swimsuit character models, but there is very little purpose to rewatching them after you've beaten the game. That's a weird, out of place comment about swimsuit models. Like, I'm not gonna sit there and deny that, like, you know, growing up a boy, sometimes you be horny about things, right? It's just how it is. I was not horny about the swimsuit stuff in this game, so I don't know why I have just like this random mention about swimsuit character models in here. So I don't know. There's also a model viewer, which also holds little entertainment value. While not necessarily a bad game, Xenosaga Episode 3 just does not live up to Episode 1 and 2. Man, I'm making a statement there. Xenosaga Episode 3 does not live up to Episode 2. I know people would not like that. That's not really a statement. I would say that all the time. People probably know that I feel that way. While not necessarily a bad game, Xenosaga Episode 3 just does not live up to Episode 1 and 2. The combat system lost most of what gave the series an identity in the first place. Unfortunately, Episode 2's failure to deliver basically sealed Episode 3's fate, and it shows. The low production values and hastily ended story hurt the experience. It makes Episode 3 feel entirely made just to finish the story to attempt to give fans closure. In the end, it feels like a very average RPG compared to past entries. Episode 3 was printed in a very limited quantity, making it a fairly rare title to find. It ranges from $25 to $40 use, no used, just used, and $50 to $60 new on Amazon, which isn't too horrible considering it's a 3-year-old PlayStation 2 title. but it's a bit on the expensive side. I can only recommend this title to fans who enjoyed episode 1 and 2. Anyone who hasn't played episode 1 and 2 before really should play those titles before they even considering purchasing episode 3, since the stories are so directly related. One would be lost if they played episode 3 first. Interesting fact, if you did not know, Americans in Europe, they did not get episode 1 and episode 2. They literally just released episode 2, or they did not get episode 1 and episode 3. They literally released episode 2 on its own, which was a bizarre and crazy move. So yeah, I'm kind of curious how much Xenosaga episode 3 costs today. I think it is a lot more. We'll go to price charting rather than Amazon. But yeah, I think they did a reprint of Xenosaga 3 at some point as well. But yeah, it's like $200 for a complete copy right now. Around like $250 for $260-ish for a new copy, which seems like it spiked up around like 2019. Yeah, so it always had some level of value just because the low print run of it. But it definitely looks like when COVID started, I guess people were like, now's the time I'm probably gonna play through all of Xenosaga. But it has dropped since then. I'm looking at May 2021. That was the peak, $279, and then it dropped down to $200. I think a lot of that like COVID spike that happened is ending for video games in a lot of ways, but we'll see. We're in the middle, like when I'm recording this, I'm in the middle of the Omicron variant or whatever, so good times. We'll see what happens in the future. But anyways, and I gave this game a 7.8 out of 10. That seems really high. For the text of that video, or that review, that seems ridiculously high to me. If I were to do a gut rating based off like what I just read, I'd probably say a 6 at most with that. So, yeah, I don't know. 7.8 seems really, really high, but I don't know. Like, this is all just gut feeling scoring, I'm pretty sure. Anyways, that's enough of that. So yeah, that is definitely a hard read. These old ones are harder to read. Admittedly, some of it was still me just being bad at reading. So Ben has places to improve in the future as well. But yeah, 2009 Ben was not particularly great at writing. So yes. Anyways, but will I cover Xenosaga episode 3 again? Well, if you read my tweet about Community's article, probably not in its entirety. I just don't find a lot of reason for me to need to talk about Xenosaga episode 1 through 3, at least individually, and especially in the story elements of the game. That's not to say I won't ever, but I just have a hard time seeing that. I have thought more recently about how I would cover Monolith Soft games overall, and I think I would basically talk about them more as a whole and probably focus more on mechanics and world design. So if I talk about Xenosaga episode 3 in the future, it'll probably be about the gameplay more than anything, and both the combat and kind of dungeon exploration element of it as well. So anyways, thank you again so much for listening, and again, thank you so much for being a Patreon member. Super appreciate it. If you want to hear more of these, let me know. I'm kind of still trying to figure out, what makes most sense for Patreon. I don't want to keep doing these if nobody cares, but I think it's like a fun way to not only utilize past material I've done, but also like offer commentary about, some of the kind of, in some ways it's kind of behind the scenes, right? Should probably be at not that it should be at the $10 level, but it kind of overlaps with that a little bit. But anyways, again, thank you so much. Have a great week. Bye.